Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed, brought to you by EverAg. This is your weekly news feed for all things grain and all things feed. Each week we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives from an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping dairy and livestock producers manage their risk. I'm your host, Jim Matthews, reporting from the Chicago home office on a very wet and rainy and dreary Thursday morning. But joining me today from lovely Kansas, Director of Feed Procurement, Mr. Jake Kingsley, and returning to the Grain Feed, also from his Chicago home office, dairy broker and agent, Mr. Zach Bowers. Team, how are we today?
Doing all right.
We are doing well. So sleepy.
I'm a little sleepy, Zach. How about you?
I'm a little sleepy, too. That was a late night, Jim.
It was a late night. And you know what? Not that kind of late night, as in we had to switch planes. Landing gear was down, but not in a cool way. It was down in a bad way.
Wasn't a big deal, though, according to the pilot.
The pilot reassured us it's not a huge deal, but you will have to get on a new plane.
Yeah, 3 hours later.
It's starting to make sense why Cody drives 18 hours.
It was making a little bit more sense.
Every once in a while, Cody Coster's onto something. Every once in a while. But gents, we had a pretty good week. So a handful of us EverAggers from our dairy and feed producer teams were down in Dallas. We had some awesome collaboration sessions talking about how cool we are, mainly, and how we can continue to improve. I mean, you guys, I don't know how you two could improve. You are. I think you're both perfect.
I try every day. I appreciate it.
Every time I wipe that,
it shows. Well. That's where, we'll just keep it between us friends.
That sounds like a good idea.
Guys are perfect. Us guys are perfect. No matter what they tell us, no matter what our wives tell us, we're great. Well, speaking of near perfect, we have a lot happening in the markets this morning. We've got the milk markets have been up, the feed markets under some pressure. We're getting closer to perfect in terms of what we could report this morning. So maybe Paige, if you would kindly timestamp the broadcast. It is Thursday morning, and we've got the feed markets again under some pressure here. We've got some red on the screen. You know, it's wheat that's been that stubborn grain, let's say. I know we always meal as our stubborn little byproduct, but wheat is the one that is still managing to hold some green on the screen here this morning. So we have to keep an eye on that sucker because I think, Jake, as we've discussed, it's providing a little bit of support to that corn market, and we'll let you touch on that here in a little bit. But we've got wheat up about 10 cents. We've got July Chicago wheat at 643. So that's helping limit corn's breakdown. We've got July corn at least back down a little closer to 450. We're at 456 this morning. December is back under 480. We look at soybean meal, that stubborn little byproduct. We've got July meal at 374 and December at pretty much the same, maybe a couple ticks lower. But that meal market that had been on a pretty rapid run up, at least for the last 3 sessions now, is starting to cool off a little bit. And as Jake, you'll discuss as well, we do have that monthly WASI report tomorrow on Friday. So recording Thursday, that'll be out tomorrow on Friday. But we're going to start off with Mr. Zach Bowers talking about these wild little dairy markets. Zach, we were having a lot of fun, and we were in the big conference room, EverAg headquarters in Dallas yesterday. Spot session kicks off, and all you dairy brokers and agents, your screens light up. Everyone's throwing a party. What was going on there?
Yeah, spot cheese is back to year-to-date highs, 195. Limit up, class 3. Got a little follow through today. You know, April class 3 came off the board at 15.5, and you got 20.5 trading today. $5 difference in only a couple months, right? Very exciting from what's been a, quite frankly, depressing market for the last 6 to 8 months. And I think what we're seeing is finally that supply side is kicking in, right? We have lost a lot of milk. We've seen it in the last 7, 8 now, maybe even more. I'd have to go back and look. Milk production reports where we're down on milk production. We continue to see those dispersals happening. All the while, seasonally, we're going to be walking into a time where we start losing milk just because of the heat, losing components. And then you mix on top of that, last week, we got a phenomenal export report. Exports were record highs, 110 million pounds, 34 million of that going to Mexico, right? That, I think, on the backs of the supply side story, we saw a little bit of the demand side that we needed to see happen, albeit that was a March report. So it is looking back at history. If you look back at that time, we were 40 to 50 cents cheaper than the rest of the world. So it makes sense that we got those exports, right? So the $1 million question, I think, going forward is, did we go too high, too fast, and now price ourselves out of that market once again? Domestically, demand isn't getting worse, but it's not great either, right? I think the trend is our friend there. But at $2 cheese, I can imagine we probably start to lose a little bit of demand. At $2 cheese, we definitely start to lose export markets as, the rest of the world is at elevated prices. 180 to 190, we're now at $2, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see going forward how long we can hold these, if they're sustainable. I do believe we are a $2 cheese market eventually. I don't know if it's right now and how long we can hold it, right? So, but overall, I think, again, trend is our friend. That supply side isn't going to uptick anytime soon with where replacements are, with the cost of building new dairies, things of that nature, right? So I think supply is going to remain tight. Just the $1 million question is when demand comes back for real and for long.
Yeah, and I think this applies to our markets too, right, on the grain and feed side. You noted that, hey, we are looking back a little bit, and let's all remember that prices were low when those purchases started to happen. But I think we've also seen, especially in the grain world, right, Jake, is that just because prices are low, it doesn't mean the global demand has to step in and grab those. And as we talked about with Phil on the show last week too, talking about some of those exports, it's not as important necessarily directly to the American dairy market as it is to grain, but the Chinese, let's say, lack of commitments to step in despite corn being on its low. So just because prices are low, it doesn't mean folks have to step in and buy, but it's good to see our neighbors to the south continue to be a contributor here, at least in both markets, really, because they're a major corn player now. It's good to see him stepping into dairy. Zach, as we kind of enter we're starting to wrap up the school years here in the U.S. Is there going to be any differences in terms of the milk market when kids are wrapping up school? We enter the summer. Anything that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, it's seasonally, you're going to see fluid milk sales drop off, right? Because schools aren't purchasing anymore, right? But at the same time, you're also talking about grilling season. So cheese demand is going to uptick a little bit as well, too, right? So I think you're going to balance that off with demand elsewhere, as well as supply and components coming down just from the heat, right? So nothing out of the ordinary is going to happen there, I don't think.
Gotcha. Good deal. Okay. That sounds good. Appreciate it, Zach. Jake, let's turn to you, bud. We're looking at the corn market at least pull back. And I think we referenced maybe on the last show, we had that wager when your son was in the room. We said we wagered on, I think, a glass of milk. He's not in the room. I think this is a stronger drink than some milk, but we made a wager on May corn at 443, I think, and maybe a tick or two. We know May's not necessarily the focus now. We've only got a handful of trading days left, but we are trading right back to 443 again on May. So just in terms of how that reflects the corn market itself, we've seen some big swings in this market. I mean, just a couple of months ago, we made what were the maybe 2.5 to 3 year lows in the nearby corn market. Then we've run up a decent chunk here, at least because of that very strong and stubborn wheat market. But again, at least corn's back under some pressure today. Meal is as well for at least 3 days running now. What's the impact on the feed markets in your mind, Jake?
Yeah, I think we've seen quite a bit of whiplash here in the futures market as you're talking. It's interesting to see that wheat's driving it and that a lot of this is domestic headlines. We're hearing some of our folks that are out there chopping wheat right now for green chop or forage on these dairies. Texas Panhandle guys they're very happy with the yields on the stuff. The quality's a little lower. The protein content's just a splash lower, but typically with a wheat crop, the higher the yield, the lower the protein. So nothing out of the norm there. Will be interesting to see over the next few weeks how the crop really shapes up across the greater part of the grain belt there. I know we've had a lot of hail events across parts of Kansas and Oklahoma and parts of Nebraska that could be fairly detrimental to some yield in certain bands of that area. I ran from Dallas up to Wichita along 35 yesterday. Now 80 mile an hour along the side of the highway is hard to get a good yield estimate on this crop, but it doesn't look terrible from the driver's seat, and it is turning rather quickly. I think there was a noticeable change in the color of the crop from just Monday to now. So it is moving along, start to get some good data out of the field. Combine's running through it here in just a matter of a couple of weeks. I think by the time we get to Father's Day here in a month, you'll be running through the heart of Kansas and really know what that crop's doing. So that'll maybe take a little bit of the unknown out of these markets for a while, and then we'll truly be focused on precipitation events across the I-states and the more traditional weather market for our growing season here. I think it may feel a little counterintuitive, but this run up in futures can be beneficial to feed buyers and end users here, because we are hearing yet again, I think this is now probably the third quick upcycle in futures values that we've had in the last 45, 60 days. And with each one of those, and this one's no different, we're seeing more grain being sold by the farmer into the commercial pipeline. Some stuff coming off of storage in the commercial elevators that was unpriced, some new stuff coming out of the bins. I think our team is estimating that roughly 2/3 of the old crop bushels have been now sold by the farmer. So catching up a little bit closer to where normal would be. Still pretty lightly sold on new crop, but another layer did get sold with this run up in futures. And the point is, basis didn't have to do much work to make that stuff move, right? In fact, I would say since the end of March when we got our acreage report to now, we've seen some basis values in the Midwest slide, particularly in corn and soybean meal. We've seen overall cash prices across the country. Basis values have slid just a little bit, not as much as we think they could before this is all said and done, but we have seen some movement. Canola's been a little bit of an outlier. We've got concerns of a potential rail strike with the Canadian railroad unions that I think the deadline to resolve or strike is May 21st or so, and a lot of canola comes out of there. So that's got some people on edge. They'll typically start to slow down movement along those lines here a week or two ahead of a potential strike, but they're in negotiations right now. So that's kind of set that market off a little bit. All in all, fundamentals are still very healthy. This run up in futures gives us, again, opportunity to try to catch a breakdown in basis, maybe get some of those numbers set. I think we're at a point in the year where taking a bid to your feed vendor is to your benefit. They're looking for folks to come in with firm numbers and say, hey, this is what I'm willing to own for the next year. And then they can run that back up the supply chain and try to get something done on your behalf. So working through those conversations with folks, try to give people targets on where to start buying. I'm not saying buy all of next year's feed, but we're definitely talking about where to get that first layer on, first quarter, third, maybe even half of what you need for basis numbers for the next year in certain situations. So still, generally speaking, 20, maybe 30 cents away per bushel on new crop corn for a lot of folks. We're still probably a good $15 a ton away on proteins for new crop, but we're inching our way closer to that every day. So if we can get those knocked out and then you catch a breakdown in futures to finish out that price, then you've got some feed bought 3, 4, 5 months ahead of when you actually have to start running it through the dairy, and got time to catch, like we're seeing this nice rally in dairy, to start to pin down some profitable numbers on the farm. So that's kind of been the approach here lately. We'll see what this WASI report tomorrow brings us. I think people are probably going to focus pretty heavily on what the USDA numbers look like for South American production. We continue to see South American agencies erode their production numbers on the crop down there as weather kind of moves through and slows down the pace of harvest and gives us some concern about quality. And we've seen the last couple months, USDA really hasn't budged on that. Do they finally make a change here on the May report? Hard to know. I think a lot of people are betting that they at least should. We don't know if they will. And then we'll also get the first look at new crop balance sheets, the line items for total production for this next crop year, export demand, crush demand, ethanol, all of those pieces. We'll finally get the first look at those. So that may do a little bit of shaking up the markets as well.
Yeah, I think the fact that the May WASD, which again, it'll be out, we're recording this on Thursday, that'll be out Friday morning. The May WASD gives us that first look of the new crop balance sheet, right? So there's nothing to really compare it to month on month. It becomes front and center in terms of like when you're actually looking at the physical WASD report, that becomes the front and center. You've got your far right column is now what the current USDA projections are for the marketing year. The column to the left of it will have NA next to it because this will be the first look. But I think it might be a reminder to some folks that even with the smaller than anticipated acreage number we got at the end of March, if we use trendline yield with that number on top of what was a record production from this past fall, it could be a refresher for some folks that, oh yeah, this is a pretty big corn balance sheet. And yeah, perhaps the USDA can then tuck away some of those South American production cuts into what will now be old crop type of column in the global supply and demand sheet. So again, I think we've been arguing for at least a couple months that they should or could at least try and chase some of those South American local agencies that you referenced, Jake, chase some of those a little bit lower because they've remained fairly stubborn. We've seen a lot of pretty significant flooding in southern Brazil, but maybe that's been too recent for the USDA to make any concrete changes based on that. You brought up some of the strikes in Argentina. Does it actually ultimately impact soybean production? No, it does slow down the transit of those beans from the field to the port where they can then be crushed and containered out of there. And so perhaps that gap between what the Argentines can supply the world versus what's remaining in the U.S., I think maybe we're seeing some of that strength in the protein market as of late. But again, at least the last few sessions under some pressure. I think maybe that's what we're seeing now the last 2 or 3 days is the market doing that natural repositioning ahead of a WASI report. So it'll be an interesting one, Jake, as always, especially when they come out on a Friday, because then you just get a couple hours to trade it. You've got a weekend to digest it before we come out firing on Monday. Always a good look. And you know what, Jake, before we go, you've got your smile hat on. Are you going to get a new hat next week?
I'm hoping so. This one's a year old, getting a little dingy. Time to upgrade.
Brushing that up. All right. So Jake and I will be zigzagging across Florida next week. The highlight will, of course, be the Southeast Milk Leadership Conference in Tampa. So we're very excited about that. We'll have a couple of our other colleagues bouncing around with us, too. So very exciting, Jake. That means I have to physically see you 2 weeks in a row. So how you feeling about that?
What a treat. What a treat.
Wow. Zach, you buying that?
Not for a second.
Not for a second. Not for a single second. Neither am I. Fantastic. But at least, Jake, you smiled through it. And I really appreciate you at least making an attempt. So that's awfully nice. Gents, this is some fantastic work. A big thanks to Zach Bowers for returning to the show, especially on limited sleep from a late night in Dallas. Again, not in the coolest way, but we did it. We're back. Great to have your insights. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
We'd also like to thank the Everag Insights crew for their support. Thank you to Paige for production magic. Thank you to the viewers for watching. The grain feed contact information is on the screen. We greatly appreciate your, Zach.
He's never seen the show.
Feedback. See it up. Do it.
Feedback.
That's all for today. We'll see you next time on the Grain Feed.